Bienvenue, bienvenue à cet atelier de la CPL. Nous allons commencer dans quelques instants. Pour avoir l'interprétation en français, veuillez cliquer sur le bouton interprétation en bas de votre page à droite, près du bouton cliquer. Je vais vous mettre aussi le lien vers les slides en français dans la partie discussion. Merci.
So good morning and afternoon to all of you. Bonjour à tous. As we begin, I just want to mention a second time that we are using simultaneous translation for today's workshop. So to select French audio, use the Globe Live translation icon at the bottom of your Zoom window.
Bonjour à tous. Donc, pour ceux qui viennent d'arriver, pour vous rappeler que vous pouvez avoir l'interprétation en français, il faut cliquer sur le bouton interprétation en bas à droite de votre écran et ensuite choisir français. C'est François Godbout qui fera l'interprétation aujourd'hui. Merci beaucoup à lui.
Thanks, Joelle. So hello again. My name is Krista Costas-Bradstreet. I'm the Director of Partnerships and Policy for the Canadian Parks and Recreation Association. Joining me to introduce the workshop and CPRA in French is Joelle Deroule, who you've already met, and she is our Quebec Francophone liaison. I just also want to acknowledge MJ Akonde. She is CPRA's Director of Operations, and without MJ, these workshops would definitely not be possible. So she manages all of our background Zoom function. So many thanks and other things. I just want to start by saying that the national office of CPRA is located in Ottawa. And I would like to acknowledge that CPRA is located on the unceded traditional territory of the Algonquin and Mohawk First Nations. We acknowledge the historical oppression of lands, cultures, and of the original peoples in what we now know as Canada. And we aim to contribute to the healing and decolonizing journey we all share together. For those of us who are settlers, through our work at CPRA, we commit to recognizing and honoring the relationships between Indigenous people, their life ways, and their land. Today's workshop is the fourth of 5 ReImagine REC workshops. And so before we begin, Joelle and I would just like to take a very few minutes to introduce you to CPRA. I'll hand it over to Joelle to start.
Merci, Krista. Donc, pour ceux qui viennent de se joindre à nous, vous pouvez entendre l'atelier en français en sélectionnant le bouton interprétation en bas à droite et puis français. Donc, maintenant, je vais vous présenter la vision de la CPL. La CPL est une coalition de toutes les associations provinciales et territoriales de parcs et de loisirs du Canada. Collectivement, nous rêvons d'un Canada où chacun peut vivre des expériences récréatives et enrichissantes et accessibles qui permettent aux individus et aux collectivités de s'épanouir tout en protégeant notre environnement naturel et bâti.
Canadian Parks and Recreation Association is a national organization dedicated to realizing the full potential of parks and recreation as a major contributor to community health and vibrancy. Over our 60-year history, CPRA has been the national voice for parks and recreation, advancing the collective interests of our members through leadership in advocacy, policy, and research. We are a community, a national network, dedicated to the well-being of people, communities, and the natural and built environments. And we serve as a resource for our members and partners by contributing knowledge and opportunities that enhance and grow the sector.
La force collective de la CPL, c'est d'être un réseau constitué de 13 associations provinciales et territoriales qui partagent leur expérience et leur savoir-faire. C'est aussi de pouvoir compter sur les membres du conseil d'administration, l'effectif provincial et territorial, les bénévoles, les partenaires gouvernementaux et les secteurs alliés qui participent à la réalisation des objectifs. C'est enfin un bureau national composé de 8 employés qui assure la permanence.
So CPRA is engaged in several initiatives. We won't go into everything today, but I did want to mention the bench. For those of you who have joined us before in our other webinars, you'll be familiar with us telling you about the bench. We introduced it in the summer of 2020, primarily to provide information around COVID-19, but it has since grown and really is meant to be an online community, a place where the sector can meet, work and grow together. We still do have a number of COVID-19 and other resources on the bench, but have expanded it to include events, discussion groups. There's a portal dedicated to the framework for recreation in Canada and also one for Parks for All. There's professional development opportunities and also a job board. So if you haven't had a chance to sign up, we really encourage you to do that because we think that we'll obviously be able to get more out of it. Individually and collectively, if the more people that are on it, and also using it to post their information and so on. And so coming actually in early in this new year, we will be relaunching a bit of an updated version of this. So we're going to try and make it a little bit easier to use. And we're also going to be launching the benefits hub. So we're encouraging you again to sign up for the bench, share the link with your colleagues, and really help us grow this online community. So just before I turn it over to our speakers, I did mention again, we are using simultaneous translation. There's information about how to access it in the chat box. To select the French audio, use the Globe Live translation icon at the bottom of your Zoom window. And we have also enabled the transcription function. So I'll just pass it over to Joelle for that, and then I'll continue. And sorry, next slide, MJ.
Merci, Christa. Comme vient de dire Christa, donc ce webinaire en interprétation simultanée, vous devez cliquer sur le bouton interprétation dans le bas à droite de votre écran et choisir le français. C'est François Godbout qui fait l'interprétation aujourd'hui. Merci à lui. Je viens de vous mettre un lien vers les slides en français dans la partie discussion. Comme ça, ça vous aidera à suivre aussi. Et puis, il y avait une question. Ce webinaire est enregistré et l'enregistrement sera disponible sur le banc que Christa vient de vous présenter. Merci.
Thanks, Joelle. So for today's workshop, we are going to have an opportunity for questions and answers after the presentation. So while you're listening, if you have any questions, please feel free to start to enter them into the chat box. And our moderator today, Joe Dwarven, will get to as many questions as possible. At the end of the workshop as well, you will have an opportunity to complete a survey, and we'd really appreciate your feedback. It shouldn't take too long. We'll also email it to you after the workshop, but we really do rely on your great feedback to make these even better and assure that we're meeting your needs. And then in about a day or two, you'll be able to access this recording as well on the bench. So if you want to, listen to it again or share it with your colleagues, you will be able to find it there. And we have started a discussion group on the bench to address many of the topics that we'll cover today. And so again, encourage you to put any questions in or share some stories around some of the work that you're doing in this area as well. So I'd like to invite Mike Roma and Catherine Dwarven to join us. Mike is the chair of the CPRA board, and he'd just like to say a few words of welcome. So thanks, Mike.
Thanks, Krista. Hello, bonjour. On behalf of the board, thanks for attending today. It's great to see the participant list surpassing 200 today. Excellent. Also, thanks for all of our presenters and everybody who's helped make this happen. The CPRA board is very proud of the ReImagine REC work that we've done and the team that we've put together to support that work. It was done through an initial partnership with Sport Canada, and these webinars, part of the knowledge dissemination, are actually done through a partnership with FTP Park. We've always known that our work in the outdoors is important. Gives people a chance to get fresh air, be active and creative, take risk, and connect with nature. The pandemic has, I think, just accentuated this or brought this to the fore even more. That's what today's session is about. I mentioned we're very proud of a partnership we have with FTP Park, and I'd like to introduce Catherine Dwarven, who works at the Public Health Agency of Canada and the Centre for Chronic Disease Prevention and Health Equity. She's the manager of the Federal Provincial Territorial Engagement Team. She's the co-chair of the FPT Park, which is the Physical Activity and Recreation Committee, and serves as the director for the Sport, Physical Activity and Recreation Council. She hails from New Brunswick and has a master's in public policy and administration from Concordia University. So Catherine, over to you.
Thanks so much, Mike, for the introduction. On behalf of Park, it's my pleasure to be here today to support today's workshop that focuses on supporting outdoor spaces and places for physical activity, recreation, and community sport. Park is very pleased to be collaborating with CPRA on this workshop as part of our broader knowledge transfer initiative that Mike just spoke about. You know, this transfer initiative is really about outreach to engage government officials and the sector on the response, renewal, recovery of recreation, physical activity, and community sport in Canada. Now is the time. With the country still responding to the continually changing circumstances from the COVID-19 pandemic, we recognize more than ever the importance and need for welcoming neighborhoods, outdoor play, unstructured recreation. This is all for our physical and mental well-being. We've all heard the public health guidance that outdoor activity is both low risk for transmission and recommended during COVID-19 pandemic. This highlights the importance that all Canadians have access to outdoor environments that provide opportunities to increase daily movement behaviors, as well as feel a sense of connection to our environment and to one's community. I'll close by acknowledging the nice alignment between today's topic and the work CPRA is doing to champion the places and spaces area of focus of the Common Vision framework for physical activity. This project is examining ways that neighborhoods can support physical activity, accompanied by resources and pilot testing. And these are concrete actions that will help to advance this important issue. So I wish all of you a productive workshop. It's great to see the numbers, everyone coming together. And I really do look forward to hearing what the outcomes of today's discussions. Thank you very much.
Awesome, Catherine and Mike, thank you so much. Thanks for joining us today, for your words. So to get our workshop started, I'm going to introduce Joe Dwarven, who's going to be our facilitator today. Joe's career spans 30 years working in the public, private, and not-for-profit sectors with a specialty in physical activity promotion and population health. Since 2019, Joe's been an independent consultant providing services in strategic planning, project management, facilitation, community activation, stakeholder engagement, and multi-sectoral partnership brokering. He's a member of the leadership team for the CPRA ReImagine REC initiative and has been my partner on producing all of these workshops and speaker series that we're doing for government officials. And he keeps my head from exploding. So I'm thankful for his participation today. So I'll turn it over to you and to all of our speakers, and hope you enjoyed today's session.
Thank you, Krista. What a great partnership it is as well. Hello, everyone. Great to be back with you on this session today. Thanks for joining us. It's my pleasure to be with you today. We are really so fortunate to have 4 different senior leaders to share their insights with us today. What I'm going to do is I'm going to introduce each and ask them then to present their topic. And that'll take about 45 minutes, approximately actually 50 minutes or so. And then we're going to circle back and bring our speakers back together for a 15-minute Q&A. So again, I'll invite you to add your questions either into the Q&A box or the chat box. I'll monitor both, and we'll draw upon those questions as they come in for that Q&A session. So let's get started. Our first speaker is John Frittenburg. Oh, sorry. What we'll learn today, I think we've been through today's workshop, so I think we're going to move on. Yeah, okay. So here are the key themes or planks of content that we're going to be sharing with you, that we're going to be transferring to you today. Our first speaker is John Frittenburg. John is the founder and president of the JF Group, which is a nationally recognized management consulting firm specializing in recreation, sport, and physical activity sectors. John has long established himself as a senior leader in recreation, consulting with governments, the private sector, the NGO community to inform policy and program delivery at a pan-Canadian level. And John is the lead of the ReImagine REC initiative that is being undertaken by CPRA. So it's my pleasure to introduce John as our first speaker. John, over to you.
Thanks very much, Joe. And we'll talk later about the fact that you emphasized the word long when you were talking about my career. In any case, I'm happy to be here today. This is the fourth of 5 workshops that emerged as a result of the ReImagine REC project. This couldn't be a more apropos topic, actually, given what we've learned about COVID and the impact on our sector over the last while. REC is a multi-phased COVID recovery initiative led by CPRA and supported by the Government of Canada. It actually involved 4 research activities, as you can see on the screen here: literature review, survey analysis, key informant interviews, and a collection of best practices. These were all independently recorded and reported on in independent reports, plus a summary report, all of which currently reside on the bench. So if you haven't already registered for the bench, it's got a host of information that will be valuable to you over and above the ReImagine REC information, but that's where our information is. This is the 4th workshop. The first 3 were safe return to sport, recreation, and physical activity. That was back in October, frankly, when we thought we were closer to recovery than we actually turned out to be. Equity, accessibility, and inclusion. And then the third one was recreation as essential to community living. All of these were recorded sessions. As Krista mentioned, they are available on the bench. I would strongly encourage you to watch them if you haven't already done so. Each of these includes a knowledge transfer product that was created specifically for that topic. They are also on the bench. Before I get into the first slide, I'd just like to mention that we know that the situation across the country is different. There are different regulations. People are in different places with respect to reopening and so on. So our ReImagine REC's influence is to, or at least intention, is to provide you with facts and to provide you with information arising from our research, so you can develop your own plans locally. So you won't hear us say we recommend this or we recommend that. We're saying here are the facts, and please plan accordingly. So in terms of challenges and changes, we've learned a lot about COVID since March of 2020, when the pandemic was initially announced. Next slide, please, MJ. Our team actually started thinking about COVID back in 2020. And so it's been a long road, and we've learned quite a bit. The on and off nature of the working environments has been difficult and unsettling for the entire sector. Not to mention the fact that our sector was also required to pivot several times and take on new function and new roles, such as food distribution centers, testing sites, vaccination sites in some cases. So everybody was forced into making decisions on the fly. The sector is in fact off balance and continues to be so. And certainly our labor force is under unprecedented stresses. I have heard several stories of people on the verge of burnout, like we're hearing in the medical setting. And we also are losing people. People are either deciding to retire early or actually exiting the sector completely, which we can't afford, because we had a labor issue before the pandemic, and now it's just getting worse. I personally believe we're going to be living with the effects of COVID for quite a while. I know it's not a popular theme, but it is, I think, going to create a new normal that we're going to have to respond to. There seems to be increasing consensus rising from the medical community that it will become endemic, and we will be needing to respond to it over the course of time, similar to the flu. But new normals are frightening a little bit. They're not unprecedented. There was a recent article in the NRPA magazine that talked about in the 1960s, nobody, if you were a high jumper, nobody thought about going over the high jump bar backwards until the 1968 Olympics, when Dick Fosbury invented his flop, and now the Fosbury flop is in fact the new standard for high jumping. So there's a very basic example of how change isn't necessarily bad, but it is quite disruptive at the time. Right now, conditions are different right across Canada, as I said, and in regions, actually within single health regions, there are conditions that are different. We have different health restrictions, we have different fluctuating infection rates, ranges of vaccine uptake, I should say. So consequently, the responses need to be local from a recreation service delivery perspective. And also, we know that there have been unintended consequences. People have been pushing back against vaccine mandates and certainly passports. So especially frontline staff are really challenged to deal with all these new circumstances. As leaders, though, we can't be trapped by the fear of the unknown or neutered by the turbulence that happens around us. We need to accept change and we need to act upon it. So managing in a crisis, I should say. The key to adaptability is to embrace the turbulence and try to be proactive as possible. Sometimes you need to react to unforeseen circumstances, of course, but if you can be proactive, you can set your own priorities and your own objectives. One thing that has not changed and will not change, and that is our sector is a people sector. We are here, our mandate is to serve people. Now, by people, I mean your clients, your patrons, and your customers, but also I mean your staff, your colleagues, and your volunteers. We can't ignore the needs of those people. In fact, we should be possibly putting a higher priority on some of those requirements. And as public health restrictions may prevent people from accessing the facilities or participating in the programs, there seems to be consensus that reacting in a clear, concise, and communicating clear, concise messaging is absolutely important. There was a recent study in the fitness sector that drew a direct correlation between an organization's ability to be clear and concise and supportive in its messaging and the return rate of people when the facilities were allowed to reopen. So there was a direct correlation between the way people were communicated with and the propensity for coming back after the services were allowed. So that is really important to understand, because communicating now for results, better results later, is a concept that some people aren't really grasping at the moment. There's changes in policies and practices that we're going to have to deal with. We know, for example, that coming out of the current situation, people are going to be looking for a mix between in-person and virtual programming. I've heard estimates of 65%, 35%, with in-person programming being the 65%. And of course, that's going to have pricing issues, because people are going to be looking at graduated pricing for that. It's important also to be empathetic in your management style, to be an adaptive leader, which means you have to listen to what people's needs are and then respond accordingly. And finally, teamwork. Our sector has always been good at working together. I know at the very beginning of time, people were organizing regional Zoom calls and things along those lines. So that's all very good and very admirable. It is essential now. We can't act in a vacuum. We need to be acting as a collective. And then readying for recovery. I know that none of us have crystal balls, but it's becoming increasingly clear that there are indicators that there will be short-lived consequences as well as long-term changes that will be required. Changes will be driven by, next slide please, MJ. Changes will be driven by a combination of regulations and standards imposed by authorities as well as your clients' preferences. So it's a combination of both being responsive to directives as well as listening and responding to the needs of your customer. In the near term, it is likely we will have capacity limits. That's happening already. Once those of you who are able to open your facilities at this point know this because the limits are being imposed in many cases. We also know that there are innovative architectural and mechanical designs that are being injected into new facility designs and renovation specifications. You think about things like wider halls, more automation, sanitation and filtration of air handling systems, fresh air chimneys, common area designs such as changing rooms are going to be adjusted in response to this, and new program delivery strategies. Without question, I think we're going to be seeing a combination of indoor and outdoor activities, whether it's organized or discretionary, but more outdoor activity, and that's why it's important for this particular workshop. Of course, planning includes a whole variety of different alternative plans, but one of which is the budgetary impacts. And those of you who are working through this will know your costs may not have changed, although your revenue structure probably has changed a lot. So you may want to go in a particular direction, but financial limitations may get in your way. And last but not least, like everything else worth doing, you should plan it, do it, measure it, record the results, and make adjustments along the way. Thank you very much.
Thank you, John. We appreciate that. John has done an excellent job of helping us to set the context to receive the next set of speakers. Key themes, of course, adaptive leadership, the critical importance to accept and manage change, and on a positive note, that the sector, of course, is in a good position to be both reactive but also proactive in managing that change. So next slide, please, MJ. It's my great pleasure now to introduce our next speaker. Troy is a professor and department chair in the Faculty of Recreation and Leisure Studies at the University of Waterloo. He is also director of the Healthy Communities Research Network, and in these roles, he focuses his work on transformational placemaking, and where his research and work contribute to positive change for people, communities, through the reshaping and remaking of community spaces. Among other themes, his work examines a variety of contexts that converge around the broader themes of quality of life, quality of community life. And Troy, as noted earlier, is leading the research on behalf of Canadian Parks and Recreation Association that advances the spaces and places area of focus for the common vision. So welcome, Troy, and over to you.
Thank you, Joe. I'm assuming I'm up on the screen, but I'm really delighted to be here today and excited to address the vast audience that we've attracted today. As Joe mentioned, I'm going to be discussing the Common Vision Spaces and Places Initiative, and specifically some of the efforts that we've been undertaking as a part of the Common Vision project. I do want to give some credit, public credit, to Krista Costas Bradstreet and Rebecca Mayers, who I've been working with on this project. Krista is the lead, actually, and so I've been assisting her with that. I also want to give recognition to PHAC, so the Public Health Agency of Canada, and CPRA for their involvement in this project. All right, let's move on to the first slide. I suspect that the word, or at least one of the top words during 2020, 2021 was pivot. I heard John mention it in his remarks, but the reality is that Canadians needed to live differently during the pandemic, not only to avoid infection and changing their behaviors to do so, but also being forced to change their mobility because of public health restrictions that were understandably put in place to mitigate the spread of infection. As a result, Canadians were very much in the mindset of either just trying to get by or perhaps if they were lucky to get ahead in their everyday living. Next slide, please. One of the major public health restrictions that have been in place during the course of the pandemic was the idea of physical distancing. Let me go on a soapbox for a minute and just say that, can we all stop using the term social distancing? Please, as you move forward, if you've been using the term social distancing, stop and start using the term physical distancing. I mention this because as much as we were asked to isolate to avoid the spread of infection, we need to be conscious that that there was a need for individuals while they were isolating to still connect socially with other Canadians. The idea of encouraging people to social distance is actually antithetical to their health and well-being. And so again, I just want to underscore that point, because as we start to move into content related to outdoor spaces, I think it's important to think about what is safe and what is healthy for individuals who are in those spaces. Next slide, please. So under normal circumstances, we need to appreciate that physical distancing is unnatural for us. There is a tremendous amount of research that exists that speaks to the value of social connection and the need for us as human beings to socially connect in person with our fellow human beings. As a result, during the course of this pandemic, not surprisingly, physical distancing restrictions, though understandable, have taken a toll on everyday Canadians. Next slide, please. It's led to feelings of loneliness and social isolation. Let me contrast those two terms just so that you understand the difference. Social isolation refers to the objective absence of informal supportive relationships. The idea here is that an individual who is socially isolated has no supportive relationships upon which to draw in times of crisis. Loneliness, by contrast, is the subjective absence of informal supportive relationships. And that can afflict many of us, especially during a pandemic. We may have a number of supportive relationships, but because of our situation, maybe because of physical distancing or other restrictions, we may not have an ability to actually connect with those supportive relationships, and as a result, feel lonely because of it. These are two terms that have afflicted Canadians, not just during the pandemic, but at really disconcerting levels pre-pandemic. Next slide, please. I wanted to present to you this information about social isolation and loneliness that comes from the Angus Reid Institute. It came out in 2020, I believe, at the peak of at the beginning of the pandemic. And so my suspicion is that these numbers actually speak to an even bleaker situation as the pandemic has gone on. I'm going to point you to the blue text that I've included on the slide. Those percentages at the top of the slide indicate the number of Canadians who feel lonely or isolated or both. And if you'll note, we're talking about well over half the population in Canada. That's really disconcerting when we think about people's health and well-being, in large part because we've come to appreciate how important social connectedness is in terms of advancing people's health and well-being. Next slide, please. In my own region of Waterloo, a study was conducted in 2021, talking to a number of residents, asking how they felt. You'll note that in this slide, 70% agreed with the statement, "I have felt lonelier than normal during COVID-19. Next slide, please. Moreover, 72% of respondents also reported agreeing with the statement, I believe that feelings of social isolation have had a negative effect on my personal well-being during COVID-19. Here, again, I just want to underscore that while we're trying to avoid the spread of infection, and that is obviously a serious threat to our well-being, at the very same time, many of the restrictions that have been in place have also had a negative impact on people's feeling of loneliness or social isolation. Next slide, please. In the past decade or so, researchers have been conducting projects that have amassed an incredible amount of evidence to suggest that loneliness, social isolation are truly devastating to people's well-being. In fact, this quote from Julianne Holt-Lundstedt, who is regarded as the leading researcher in the world in the area of social isolation and loneliness, is often used to emphasize how critical it is that we address the issues of social isolation and loneliness. She's quoted as saying, loneliness is equivalent to smoking 15 cigarettes a day. Next slide, please. I say all this because it's important for us all to recognize that while we're living through a pandemic associated with COVID-19, we're also living through an epidemic of social isolation and loneliness. And that's having a huge impact on everyday Canadians. Next slide, please. I'm sure we all can appreciate that public health restrictions constrained our mobility, which forced us to be creative in facilitating experiences for ourselves. Many Canadians engaged in a variety of activities which were within public health guidelines, but changed their behavior in terms of trying to either connect with others or engage in more physical activity, using the spaces and places that were actually accessible to them. Next slide, please. This led, in my view, and I've just recently written about this, this led to leisure, something that I call leisure in public, emerging as an act of resilience used both consciously and unconsciously for personal enrichment and pleasure by Canadians to advance their health and well-being. Leisure in public means engaging in leisure, recreation, sport as a way to balance out one's life. And it is engaged in public spaces, in different outdoor spaces that actually are accessible to us during this challenging time of living through public health restrictions. Next slide, please. Now, I want to underscore this point. When it comes to evidence about how to get people involved in physical activity, there is no stronger correlate for physical activity participation than getting outside. We, as professionals, as academics who are involved in our field, really ought to be underscoring this point, because if we want an active public, we need to encourage them to get outside at all times of the year, including the winter, so that they can get that sort of physical activity they need. Next slide, please. You'll notice, I'm sure you'll recognize this photograph. It was taken in Toronto at the beginning of the pandemic. It was an effort by park agencies to address public health restrictions and enable Canadians to visit their local spaces in a safe way. These are still practices that I suspect some parks actually follow, but what we've learned since that time is that actually we're even more confident about how safe outdoor spaces can be. Next slide, please. Now, I've been asked to maybe change the language of this, the red text on the screen to lower risk. That is that outdoor risk of COVID-19 transmission is lower than indoor. But I will say that there is overwhelming evidence that outdoor is much less risky than remaining indoors. And in fact, when we look at a rapid scoping review of evidence from the literature, it came out that again, there was a much lower risk to outdoor activity than indoor. And the authors of the manuscript stated that the small number of cases where outdoor transmission may have occurred was actually associated, they think, with close interactions, particularly for extended duration. So in other words, if we stay in outdoor spaces, we're in close contact with other people for a long duration, or settings where people mix their indoor activities with outdoor activities, those are the things that researchers believe are the reasons for seeing transmission in outdoors. And in fact, just recently, a study came out of the US where they examined 1,000 Division I football players in the United States to see what they're, by practicing outdoors and their time outdoors, what sort of impact that had on their transmission or getting COVID-19. And they found out of the 1,000 athletes that they examined, they found 0 cases. So again, I just want to underscore that there is a risk, but it is very, very low. Next slide, please. Which leads me to wonder, all of the efforts that we've placed on the time and resources spent addressing outdoor activities in terms of encouraging joggers and cyclists to wear outdoor masks, or to close down playgrounds at the beginning of the pandemic, or to engage in restrictions within outdoor environments, has been skewed, I would say, relative to where the transmission actually overwhelmingly occurs, and that is in indoor spaces, particularly in workplaces, crowded households, long-term care facilities. So I think that's important for our field to appreciate. Next slide, please. But when I talk about outdoors, and we're going to have 2 great panelists who are going to talk about, I think, green spaces in a large part, maybe other things. I want to talk not just about green spaces, but hard spaces too. And that is, when I'm talking about hard spaces, I'm thinking about streets, sidewalks, parking lots, those asphalt environments that we have never really considered as recreational spaces in the past. Next slide, please. If I've learned anything from the pandemic, it's that our neighborhoods became more important than ever. And in fact, I would argue that Canadians engaged more in the act of neighboring because of COVID-19 as a way to cope with their experiences in the pandemic. And therefore, I think neighborhoods are spaces that we need to start thinking about in terms of people's recreation and sport behavior. Next slide, please. This leads me to the Common Vision project, and this is the Spaces and Places initiative, where to promote physical activity, a number of agencies have come together to underscore the importance and I guess come together as a common group to advance physical activity in Canada. We realize that we should not just be focused on physical activity though, but based on the upfront slides that I presented, we should also consider social isolation. And so therefore, next slide, please. We've been busy developing something that we've called a tactical toolkit to help Canadians hack their neighborhood for greater physical activity and social connection. Next slide, please. I'm going to talk about the 8 strategies that we've underscored in this tactical toolkit. And these are things that you can advance in your practice. 1, we can naturalize our neighborhood spaces. That's enhance neighborhood spaces with plants, flowers, and or grasses to beautify the landscape and make it more appealing as places to spend time. That can include community gardens, portable gardens, guerrilla gardening, or parking day, which is a an activist event that is organized in many cities. Next slide, please. We can activate our community. We can use visual displays of physical activities such as sport demonstrations or the availability of sport equipment to encourage spectators and participants. Things like outdoor rinks, street yoga, or projecting images or chalk on a surface to indicate sport play. Next slide, please. We can culinarize our neighborhoods. That is, incorporate food, particularly its preparation, distribution, and consumption into neighborhood spaces. So we can have food trucks, street barbecues, or perhaps food stands. Next slide, please. We can spectacleize. That is, we can use featured entertainment to attract people to neighborhood spaces, host street concerts or buskers or circle shows. Next slide, please. We can also engage in pop-up cinema, inflatables, fireworks, parades. These are all ways that we can spectacleize. Next slide, please. We can festivalize and eventify our neighborhoods. That is, we can organize public gatherings to bring a festive atmosphere to neighborhood spaces. We can close roads for play. We can host actual festivals in our neighborhoods. Next slide, please. We can aestheticize. We can use art in its variety of forms to beautify a neighborhood space and encourage greater activity. Things like yarn bobbing or painting up or chalking up the street or streetscapes. Next slide, please. We can convivialize. We can provide features that give neighbors the cue to gather, sit, and socialize in neighborhood space. We can engage in chair bombing, where we bring chairs to a public space, or we can reshape our yards so that we offer inviting places to sit in the front yard. We can whimsicalize and gamify, that is, add imaginative and sometimes quirky features or illustrations to signify gameplay to encourage activity in neighborhood spaces. I'll note that the swings and bus stops that we see in Montreal as a great example. Next slide, please. So there are a variety of considerations that I'll just mention quickly as we think about engaging in these types of activities. Next slide. First of all, I think we need to underscore the resource that is available in the form of our neighborhoods. Let's identify those as spaces that we can target and we can support neighbors in their interest in being more physically active and socially connected. Next slide. We can build back better. We can start thinking about what we can do in neighborhood spaces to encourage more physical activity, whether it's providing equipment or widening sidewalks or providing more green spaces. These efforts are going to be really important in terms of localizing physical activity and social connection. Next slide. We need to think about the challenge of seasonality. So seasons like winter, how do we get people outside, active and connected during the most difficult time to do so during the year? Next slide. And we need to think about the policing and surveillance of public space. The reality is that a lot of these efforts allow neighbors to engage in activities without necessarily asking for permission to engage in them. And when we police or surveil these types of activities, we need to be conscious, are we doing it because of the individuals involved, because of their social status in society, or can we support all types of groups and ensure that a variety of neighborhoods, a variety of landscapes, rural, urban, different age groups can engage in these practices without the fear of them being stopped by authorities. Next slide. That's it for me. Thank you so much for listening.
Thank you very much, Troy. Excellent content. What you've given our participants is a lot to chew on. The relevance of neighborhoods, of course, and the fact that, traditionally we think about the obvious, and that is access and focus on organized parks. But the notion of reclaiming civic spaces is a key message in your content. My favorite of the 8 8 considerations or 8 helpful and practical opportunities in the toolkit to come is yarn bombing. So thanks for that, Troy. Okay, I'll just note that we are on time. So I'll invite again those of you who would like to pose questions for Troy and upcoming speakers to do so either in the chat box or in the Q&A box, and we'll be monitoring them for the Q&A session to follow. All right, let's move on. It's my great pleasure to introduce Heather Cowie. Heather joins us today in her role as Senior Leader and founding member of Outdoor Play Canada. She's also a General Manager of Community and Protective Services with the City of Fort Saskatchewan. And prior to that, she was with the City of Calgary, where she had a great impact on the work related to outdoor access and play, including being instrumental in bringing the 2017 International Play Association Conference to that city. She's co-creator of the Mobile Adventure Playground, which is awesome, and the Play Charter during her tenure in Calgary. Not least, Heather is also the current president of the Alberta Recreation and Parks Association. So welcome, Heather. Over to you.
Excellent, thank you. And thank you, Troy. Great presentation. And I think mine just slides in very nicely. I think I want to start off by saying my name is Heather and I'm on a 9-day winning streak in Wordle. So we'll just leave it at that. I'm delighted today to talk to you a little bit about Outdoor Play Canada and then some of how I've taken what we're doing at the national level and implemented at the local level. So Outdoor Play Canada has been in existence sometimes on the back of a napkin for a number of years. And our next speaker was also instrumental in helping bring this organization to life. So our mission is to promote and protect and preserve that access to play in nature and the outdoors for all people. So it's not just about children, it's all. And especially I think as Troy talked about, we need to be outside, whether you're an adult, a senior, or a child. Next slide, please. So yeah, again, our vision, I won't read it to you. And again, we want to galvanize that outdoor play movement. And we have seen some significant movement since 2015. Next slide, please. This is our leadership team that I get to hang out with. There's some pretty heavy hitters on this team. Dr. Mark Tremblay, Mariana Bersoni, Frank Welsh, Raktim Matira. And you'll note that I'm the only non-PhD on this team. So my role is to keep everybody humble, but I am published. So that's my claim to fame with this team. Again, a great group of people who do research and practice as it comes to outdoor play. Next slide, please. Just to go back to some basics about the benefits of outdoor play, we know that when you're outdoors, children move more, they sit less, they play longer, and they learn how to balance that risky play on their own through a safety lens. And so I think we've talked about rather have children develop that risk sense when they're younger, as opposed to when they're 17 and they're just experiencing it for the first time. That active lifestyle improves our blood pressure, cardiorespiration, and that increased resilience and self-regulation for skills for dealing with stress. As a parent, I raised a child with special needs, and whenever we could go outside, and which was as much as we could, he felt better and was able to self-regulate to more. So, and again, that musculoskeletal fitness as well. So some of the benefits as we know about outdoor play. Next slide, please. So this happened in 2015. There was a position statement on active outdoor play, which really started the movement about why it was so important to play and normalizing that word play and outdoors. And again, you'll see it with that risk is essential for healthy child development. And we recommend increasing the opportunities for self-directed play and in all settings. And Troy talked about that at home, at school, and childcare, community, and nature. And pandemic certainly brought that forward. This is, as Joe talked about, this galvanized what the city of Calgary did when this came out, because the Lawson Foundation came out with money to do projects across the country. And they put their money where this position statement came into and said, yes, we want to research more about what people are doing across the country. So this was 1,600 stakeholders that helped us, and it was a research grade report, which is important. And to date, there are 400 supporters of this position statement across Canada. And it's been a really great tool to sort of have these considered conversations. And I saw somebody in the chat talk about some of the barriers. This document and the update that we've done will help you hopefully remove those barriers. So next slide, please. So what we've been working on for the last 2 years is updating that position statement to look at what are our priorities based on that 2015 work. And we worked with a number of organizations and people across the country and across the world to look at what our priorities are for outdoor play in Canada for 2021 and moving forward. Oh, can you go back, MJ? Sorry. So they're 9 and there's a lot, but it speaks to the breadth and depth of how outdoor play can be visual or actualized in this country. So we need those cross-sectoral connections, which John talked about. We need professional development. The Indigenous peoples and land-based outdoor play, we need to explore more. That equity, diversity, and inclusion piece. Not only are there system barriers, but there's all kinds of equity and diversity and inclusion barriers that we need to pay attention to. COVID-19, I like what Troy said, and also what Marco says from Canadian Tire Jumpstart. This is an opportunity to build back better from the pandemic. Safety and outdoor play, the research is there that kids are less likely and that risk is low or negligible. Health, well-being, and development, research, data, and collection to be able to inform practice, that policy, research, and practice, and the outdoor play environment. So this was a lot of work that happened across the country with many different people contributing to this. So it is a collective document that we are now starting to figure out how to actualize. Next slide, please. So Troy talked about it. I'll just dive into it a little bit more about that reopening of Canada and the outdoors over the course of the pandemic. I think there were stories from Ottawa at the very beginning of bylaw officers giving people tickets in parks when that's where they should have been, but we didn't know what was safe and what wasn't safe. MJ, I think you can add a little bit more to the slide too. Yeah. Toronto had the largest one-year expansion of street bike lanes ever. Now they've got 25 kilometers of new bikeways. That car-free and play streets, which Troy talked about, were introduced in Vancouver, Calgary, Winnipeg, Toronto, just to name a few. I think the other issue is that what Parks and Recreation managers and directors found is that they became managers of porta potties because we had so many people outside that we needed to figure out how to look after all of the needs that usually are met from indoors. So how are they coping? Troy talked about that as well. They're getting outdoors, they're talking with families and friends, they're trying to eat well, read, and unfortunately surfing the internet. But we still need those safe access to outdoor spaces. Next slide, please. This is just some local examples from my city that we've done in terms of trying to respond to the number of people that go outside. So the top picture there is our West River's Edge, where we've created a kilometer skating loop with little skating or hockey rinks in the middle so that there's somewhere for people to go that's local, and great turnout, great feedback. We didn't damage the fish by having the ice, and it was just an amazing thing. I think from an equity and inclusion perspective, we need to look at equipment libraries that we can help those that don't have access to skates, cross-country skis, helmets, winter clothing. That's some of the things that we're trying to pay attention to. Troy talked about yarn bombing. We did rock bombing. So it was started by the community at West River's Edge in the summertime as a way to connect through painted rocks. And I think we ended up with over a kilometer of rocks painted by children, by adults, by organizations, just to bring a smile and bring that community connection. And because we plow those pathways, we didn't want the rocks ruined. So our public works department pick them all up and put them all at City Hall so that that legacy of that community connection was maintained, and then we'll put them back out again in the spring. The last picture is Elk Island National Park, which is about 25 minutes away from me here in Fort Saskatchewan. Great place to go in the wintertime to cross-country ski, to hike, to snowshoe, but they've added an ice rink over the course of the last 2 winters to increase opportunities for people to be outside in the wintertime. Next slide, please. So again, those considerations about diversity and inclusion, and that access to natural spaces is not equitable across Canada. That a priority that I talked about previously is that that need to advocate for equity, diversity, and inclusion is super important. And our public health agency has recognized that as equity is a critical public health issue. Efforts of our federal government to respond to issues of social development and inclusion, and Canada's commitment to advance the United Nations sustainable development, to leave no one behind. And so that's something that we're paying attention to. And as an organization, we are going through training, a number of different trainings that we can make sure that our lens is not just that white middle class lens when we're looking at outdoor play, something that I'm very proud of the work that we're doing in this regard. Next slide, please. So, which is interesting, based on a national survey that was done by one of our members, REC team, is that children and youth living in houses were more likely to spend time outdoors, and children and youth living in apartments 1 kilometer of parks were more likely to spend time outdoors. But then you can add that next one, MJ. Keep going, yeah. So while urban density is a potential factor, local vulnerability during a pandemic, this can be offset by access to the outdoor spaces. So not everybody in apartments lives within 1 kilometer of parks and able to access that space outdoors. So make sure to make it. So outdoor spaces, again, is not equitable. Next slide, please. So some of the other challenges that we've had that I'm sure we've all experienced is that overuse of natural spaces. And Troy talked about it, I've talked about it, and probably Dawn will talk about it. People are going outside in numbers not seen before. While this is great and we want this, it's led to tensions between promotion of outdoor play and the prevention of and overuse of natural spaces. We did have stories last winter where community members were not happy with the amount of people that were outside and were maybe putting rocks on cross-country ski trails, which is detrimental and could cause injury. So we're taking a project to identify best practices on how to balance these issues. Yeah, so again, please stop destroying the woods of Hampton Park, but we want people to be outside. So again, the top 5 ways is that people are getting outside, they need to get outside. Next slide, please. So I'm from Alberta, and we were contacted by government at the beginning of the pandemic to ask how we as Alberta Recreation and Parks Association, through our members, were dealing with the amount of people that were outdoors, and had we added extra funding, and what had we done. And we just said we just shifted resources internally to be able to deal with the amount of people that were outdoors. And the Alberta government issued a surcharge for accessing Kananaskis because there were so many people going to the provincial park that they couldn't keep up with the maintenance of outdoor washrooms and all of that. So the Alberta Recreation and Parks Association created a position statement about making sure that equitable and sustainable access to parks is kept at the forefront. I think we believe that charging a surcharge further erodes people's ability to access that service if you're unable to do so. So we've created our position statement that we encourage government leaders to engage their park and recreation professionals in decision-making process to ensure continued safe and equitable access to critical parks and open spaces for generations to come. I think our worry is you start here and you keep going as a way to do that. And we are fundamentally opposed to that, but also want to do it in a very respectful, collaborative way. So that was sort of how the Alberta Recreation and Parks responded to that. Next slide, please. So that developing that state of the sector report where you saw the nine areas, it was 63 people consultation. We met with people 4 times over 4 months to identify, refine, and vote. And so I'm proud of the work that we've done to have a really, truly Canadian approach to our state of the sector report and provide us with guidance about how we move forward. Next slide, please. So what are we doing again here in my little city of 27,000 people? We are going to be building our first natural playground in partnership with industry. We are very close to high industry here in Fort Saskatchewan. So we're pretty excited about that. We are piloting a winter outdoor play program in partnership with Canadian Tire Jumpstart that will look at clothing, food, and how to play safely outdoors. And we're also looking at outdoor Indigenous learning spaces that can be used year round. And we're very early on the planning stages with that. I just saw Patty's note. We're meeting actually this afternoon because we put out an RFP for natural playground and all we got was plastic and steel. So we're going to have to go back to the drawing board. I put this little quote in there to talk about how important it is to build that sense of community that Troy talked about, that sense of neighborhood. And this is one of we clear all of our pathways. And we have kilometers and kilometers of pathways in the city. We're next to the North Saskatchewan River, but we have pathways in the city. And so one of our snow clearing individuals was out clearing snow and the little girl waved at him and he waved back and she did a little dance of joy. And he got out of his snow clearing little truck and came out and did a little dance of joy for her. And that speaks to, we take our work very seriously, but we also take our role as community builders as seriously. So it was just a super, super cool opportunity. Next slide, please. I won't. So right now we're doing a survey about to youth and child outdoor play providers. So far we've had 36 respondents. The demand is increased. We know that. Again, largest barriers are achieving those safety protocols and procedures. Yeah, kindergartners are not good about not spreading germs. We know this, children and youth thrive. We thrive when we're outdoors. And massive efforts to bring materials online to support parents in bringing their children outdoors. Next slide, please. On the horizon, super, super cool is that the Canadian Centre of Outdoor Play, which is, it's a multi-purpose building on the National Capital Commission property, is about to begin. It's home to the envisioned of the Canadian Centre for Outdoor Play, excellence in outdoor play and early learning. So we're pretty excited about that, early stages, but we're watching and supporting that as best as we can. Next slide. And join us, become a member. That this slide deck, any information that you need, research papers, it's all there. Professional development opportunities, stay informed, and recognition opportunities. We are in that awkward teenage stage, I think, of an organization, trying to figure out if we remain an organization or move to be something more formal and with a nonprofit status. So we're thinking and growing as we move along. Next slide, please. Thank you. Really appreciate the opportunity. And I'm really looking forward to what Dawn has to say. Thanks.
Great. Thank you so much, Heather. Wonderful insights in terms of sharing practical experiences, but also critical information that our participants can turn to inform their thinking as well. Of course, the OPC position statement stands as a critical piece of policy and advocacy work that we're all using. And of course, it's supported by the International Play Association with its child right to play work as well. And I would just say that I've heard that a lot of folks who are into Wordle are in fact doing what they're calling walking Wordle. So they're getting together with folks socializing around completing their daily Wordle. So awesome. So thanks for that. Last but certainly not least, it's my great pleasure to introduce Don Carr. Many of us know of Don's leadership and contribution to Canada's parks community during her tenure as executive director of the Canadian Parks Council, the first woman ever to hold that position. More recently, Dawn has taken on a new challenge as the Director of Strategic Conservation at the Nature Conservancy of Canada, as you can see here. Dawn is growing the voice of nature through collaboration and leadership, both in Canada and also internationally, where she is a very visible and proactive volunteer. And she does this by accelerating conservation impact, by integrating and expanding the roles of private and community land conservation partnerships into natural and international dialogue and consultation. So thank you, Dawn, for being with us, and over to you.
Thanks, Joe. I have been listening intently to everybody's talks, and I've continued to learn. I'm a continuous learner, and for anybody that knows me, I'm also a complete and utter optimist. So there's so much that we've learned over the past couple of years, but I hope through my presentation, I'm going to really focus on those ideas around building back better. That phrase has always really resonated with me, and it's something we've heard a lot about. So I'm just grateful to be here. So thank you so much for inviting me. As you all can see here, I'm stuck in 2021. I put the wrong date on my presentation. So we'll move to the next slide and know that we're in 2022. So just to give you a hint as to what I'm going to lead you through over the next 10 to 15 minutes or so, is a bit of a different perspective, I would say, from Troy and Heather and the great opening remarks from John. Most of the work that I've done over the 20 years that I've been working in parks and protected areas has been mostly at the sub-national, national level, moved into some work internationally. But I just want to underscore, the partnership and love I have for the CPRA. The connections have been so strong and tight. We are all working on so many of the same and similar kinds of issues. COVID-19 has absolutely emphasized that. And I've just loved continuing to learn about and stay connected, especially through these webinar series around the relevance of REC. What has been learned and shown through these webinars has really spoken to me, my colleagues, and we're all just so interconnected. So part of the theme that I want to pull out of my presentation, and I just heard a lot about this as well through Troy and Heather, is the importance of collaborating and seeing how the interconnectedness between the work that we do is so essential to that idea of building back better. So I'm going to be speaking about scale and why that's relevant to REC. COVID-19, the past 10 years I spent working with the heads of Canada's national, provincial, territorial parks. So I thought I'd just share early day learnings and so what was happening behind the scenes amongst all of us when we were trying to figure out how to respond to this new and jarring change that we all needed to sort of figure out together. I'll move in then to converging policy imperatives. There's been some talk about that already. I'll just highlight what that means through the lens and viewpoint that in the experience that I'll be bringing, and then just how that leads into how, growing back, building back better. There's so much opportunity to do things differently in so many good ways by growing our collaborations together. So next slide, please. For those of you that don't know me, I just thought this is a little shout out as well to the panelists that are on with me today. I was so thrilled to be invited to this panel. You know, 20 years ago, I graduated from the University of Waterloo, and Troy and I were actually in grad school there together. Dr. Glover became a doctor. I never became a doctor, but he was amazing then, and he's just so extraordinary now. And so I continued to listen to his talk earlier. Outdoor Play Canada is where I got to know Heather Cowie. She's just an extraordinary leader, and she continues to show that in the work that she does, both within Fort Saskatchewan and nationally through colleagues and work with outdoor play. I just wanted to highlight here CPRA. A lot of the work that I did with CPRA in the past was around co-chairing the whole initiative around Parks for All. There is this continuum of parks, creating supportive outdoor spaces and places. We may all work at different scales, whether locally, you know, regionally, subnationally, nationally, or otherwise, but the work that we do has this connection to one another. I continue to learn that all the time. And I'm highlighting some of these different organizations here that I am and continue to care deeply about. But by staying connected, I also find myself sometimes in uncomfortable situations where I may not always sort of feel like I'm speaking the same language. I'm very embedded in the conservation world right now. But I also know that conservation, biodiversity conservation, it only has relevance when you can speak with and understand to love and care about the people who feel this connection to it. Troy spoke so deeply about the importance of neighborhoods and being able to be together with one another for health and well-being, as has Heather. So I just want to encourage everybody to continue to reach out and find those other connections. And that's going to be a very strong theme in what I speak about today. So next slide, please. I love this slide. There's hardly any words on it, but our planet is just so beautiful. The colors really resonate with me. I thought I'd share this mainly just to show a little bit about the context that I have found myself in, continue to find myself in. The green blobs that you see in front of you, those are our national, provincial, and territorial parks. Those are the places that are very important to conserving biodiversity in Canada. And all of the little blue blobs that you see along there, those continue to be very important areas as well, but may not have sort of that conservation or protection designation to them. But what I would say is when it comes to connecting with nature and reaching Canadians where they live, learn, work, and play, all of that, you know, what you see in front of you here is really important, but it may not be experienced, you know, specifically in our day-to-day life, but it's out there, it's important. And I think through the work that's happening in municipalities, through the work that's happening through our regional authorities, we are really learning as Canadians the importance of the environment to our health and well-being, and COVID-19 has been no exception. So next slide. This is a recent map. You know, I'm now, and I always thought this is such a cool title, the Director of Strategic Conservation. And a lot of people say, what does that mean? Where I find myself thinking day in and day out is just about how we can make these important places, parks, you know, if they're in your cities, communities, parkettes, out your front door. How do we make them more relevant? How do we demonstrate their importance, and how do we experience it so that we continue to grow and nurture our love for nature? What's interesting here, and this is why the little stat that you see on the lower left-hand corner of this slide, Nature Conservancy of Canada provides access to nature where 90% of Canadians live. One stat I've always known with the CPRA, which I've just loved, is that the CPRA, its community and members, exist within 90% of the communities that exist within Canada. So from an organization like the Nature Conservancy of Canada, which is national, just in terms of where we spend our time and the places that we provide for experiential and nature-based learning opportunities, they're very similar. We're existing in the same places, in the same space in Canada, and we can provide these supportive opportunities for Canadians to come and visit these places. But sometimes we don't necessarily find ourselves speaking with one another. So again, I'm just hinting at this idea around collaboration. Next slide, please. So this is a teaser because I'm going to come back to it in a minute, but COVID-19 has caused us to really think about how to manage change. We've always needed to manage change from an organizational perspective, but we have definitely been forced to think about that. And from the optimistic point of view that I've always loved to bring into my work and in life is to think about how we can grow our potential. How can we be better and become better throughout the situation that we're living through? So you can put any project or initiative in the middle here. This is like the core. And a couple of years ago, I was a fellow with this organization called Kinship Conservation Fellows. And often during that time, we talk about nested systems. And what I like about this idea is that I think when I started my career, I thought mostly around the organization I was working within. And I thought about that as being sort of, that was my system. I operated within this organization. And I think over the course of time, I've learned that potential can exist from the inside out and the outside in. And none of us operated in a vacuum. I think I heard John say that at the beginning of this this webinar, that opportunity and potential exists by looking beyond your immediate core and seeing the nested system that you operate within. So next slide, please. So COVID-19, Troy, you're gonna be proud of me because I learned something today. I'm putting this up here. This is signage that are national, and then one example of a provincial park agency put together right at the beginning of when we were faced with COVID-19, March 2020. We only knew what we knew then. It's extraordinary how different organizations and leaders needed to work with one another to understand how to move forward. We, when I was working with the Canadian Parks Council, the leadership of that council met weekly and sometimes daily just to understand, what are you doing with this particular issue? How do we mitigate risk? How do we communicate effectively with the people that need and want to come and visit our spaces, but we're faced with these new challenges around public health guidelines? What should our signage say? So you'll see at the bottom, this at the beginning, we talked about social distancing. And so there's been so much learning and evidence to show, as Troy showed us early on, how we need to get away from that language. So next slide, please. This carries on with this idea. But what we did learn is that people needed to get outside. It was really the only space where being together safely was a possibility. And there were tactics and ways that we tried to figure out how to do that well to keep people safe. And that was like the picture where you saw the circles. But what COVID-19 has definitely showed us is the importance, the incredible importance of connecting with nature, being outside, finding opportunities to spend time together safely with others. So these were the challenges, as all of you know. I'm not going to touch on this deeply, but we all in our own different organizations have needed to figure out exactly how to manage access, visitation in a way that effectively works with all of the different kinds of sectors, agencies, and organizations in other realms that needed to sort of showcase and demonstrate the health and well-being objectives that were being experienced by Canadians. Next slide, please. And so this just leads into this idea of converging policy imperatives. I just want to spend time here just for a second, because where I sit, and I think where many of you sit, there's been so much emphasis and understanding over the past couple of years that we're in a biodiversity loss and climate change crisis. That's very much a perspective that drives much of my day-to-day work. But more so, I think what has happened with COVID-19, and there's a lot of evidence and work around this now too, is the interconnectedness with human health. The benefits of connecting with nature are powerful. We've heard about that. There are so many human health and well-being benefits to connecting with nature. Climate change is also something we are facing and we need to deal with, both from an infrastructure, organizational perspective, our personal daily actions. It's there. And biodiversity loss is something that we are, people are growing more and more awareness out there. There are policies and ways of directing our business to mitigate and adapt to all of these different crises, but it's such an opportunity to figure out where you and your initiatives, the work that you do sits within this triangle. So next slide, please. I'm trying to recall what I do have on the next slide. MJ, help. There we are. So I'm coming back to this idea of a nested system, and now where I find myself with my role with the Nature Conservancy of Canada. This is just a case study example of how I'm putting the strategic thinking together. All of you, if you're working with an organization, initiatives that you're kind of wanting to move forward, the way I'm seeing it now and the work that I'm doing with others is sort of putting your strategic plan or your program at the core. And for the NCC, our vision is to, with nature, we'll build a thriving world. So that's at the beginning. And, you know, every strategic plan has a whole lot more in it in terms of, you know, objectives and how you're going to measure and tactics. Looking at what the Nature Conservancy is, we're taking a much larger understanding and seeing its role and contribution that it can play within the larger Canadian system and also international system. So as I said before, we're kind of focused on conservation, but you cannot separate conservation from other objectives now, especially in light of what we're facing with COVID-19. So looking very strategically at the work that you're doing, ways that you can grow your potential. And when I think about potential, you know, some of the nice ways of thinking about it is, and I just wrote it down so that I kind of wouldn't forget it. It's the potential of something is connected to its ability to make a beneficial contribution to the working or larger system. And I just like that way of thinking, because if we're building back better, what we're trying to do is figure out ways of making our contribution mean the most from multiple different kinds of perspectives. So next slide, please. One way we're doing this, and some of the examples or some of the icons that you see on this slide aren't that easy to see, but it's related to the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development, the SDG, Sustainable Development Goals. I would encourage all of you, it seems very high level, but the whole purpose around the 2030 Agenda is to try and mobilize people internationally, whether you're working in community or at different kinds of scales. It's mobilizing action around 17 different goals. And the idea is, if we do have these goals and coordinate and align our work together, we will achieve a shared blueprint for peace and prosperity. And if we're acting on these 17 different goals, what we're also doing is we're working to protect biodiversity and helping to tackle climate change. So the benefits of protecting and conserving nature really align with 14 and 15 of the Sustainable Development Goals, but this is the interconnectedness of what we do. There's all sorts of benefits that accrue when you connect with nature and to conserve it. And you can just see here that when you're thinking about the nested system that you're operating within, really think about and consider how you're beneficially contributing to other ways and other actions that are also really important. So next slide. Yes, I'm just going to end on this because I think when you're looking through the lens of collaboration, looking at other policy imperatives that you can contribute to in the work that you're doing locally, regionally, nationally, internationally, what comes to light are new friends. There's new friends and new opportunities to work with others to advance shared outcomes. And I think overall, when it comes to connecting with nature and the work that all of we're doing to create supportive access to outdoor places, we can see those benefits. And I think that there's a lot of opportunity for us to align our efforts so that we can together build back better. So I'm just delighted to be here. And I think that's the end of my presentation, and there may be time for questions, but it's been a real honor to be in the presence of so many great minds today, and I appreciate the opportunity. Thanks.
Thank you, Dawn. You included. Please stay on screen, and I'd like to invite all of our speakers back up. I'll just note while everyone's coming back on screen that we are about 3 minutes from the official close of the session. We may go over a couple of minutes just to ensure that we tackle some of the questions that have been posed by our participants. So let's go there quickly now, and we'll shoot it back to Mike and Krista to end in just a couple of minutes. For Troy, a question from Sean Ferguson from the field. It was spoke also by Heather in her presentation of the issue of barriers like local bylaws and liability. Do you have any comments, ideas, observations around how community-based policymakers, recreation leaders can work to address those issues with those in other sectors?
I think that's a great question, and I think it's a big challenge. I understand why a lot of individuals in authority positions would be reluctant to support these types of initiatives. I think the important thing to remember, and I'm afraid I don't have any solutions for this, but it's that temporary changes lead to longer term changes. Encouraging bottom-up interventions is a way to lead to more permanent changes, like the bike lanes that Heather mentioned that emerged over the course of the pandemic in Toronto. So I think that it's challenging. I'm not in that position, so I can't empathize or can't appreciate as much as perhaps those who are in that position. But I think that the long-term benefit of doing so is outweighs the surveillance and policing of them.
Yeah, agreed. Heather, did you want to speak quickly about this issue?
Yeah, very quickly. One of the things that the City of Calgary did is we involved our risk management and law department right from the very beginning, and brought them on and was able to demonstrate we own the risk and how it was within our purview. So just involve people from the, like Dawn talked about, those partnerships and collaboration.
Wonderful. Quick 30-second answer from perhaps John. I'll shoot this to you and ask others to follow up. Lisa McLaughlin asks, what is the role and responsibility in a shared context between citizen groups who want to bring to bear access to civic spaces, reclaiming civic spaces, and outdoor recreation, movement, play, and local governments? How should they be working together? And what's the balance of responsibility here? John, do you want to start?
Sure. Thanks for the question. It's actually, I think it's really an extension of what the sector has been doing forever, and that is many departments have dedicated community outreach departments or community development departments that are skilled at actually engaging community groups and tapping into their expertise. Because remember, in a lot of cases, we're developing these programs or creating these spaces for these groups. So, of course, the whole consultation and collaboration that is required in order to be able to do those things is something that most recreationists have been doing for a long, long time. And so I think it's a matter, though, of making sure that it is structured. The other thing which I was thinking about when Troy and Heather were providing their answers just a moment ago is that the pandemic has also forced recreation departments, public recreation departments, to be more collaborative with other jurisdictions. So public health, for example, I mean, we were forced into using recreation facilities as testing sites and as other things that really were an extension of the social services or the whole inventory of other health supporting services that are out there. And so those lines of communication in many cases are already there with other sectors. So a combination of both dealing with the community and dealing with other sectors on a cross-sectoral planning initiative, I think would be extremely very beneficial.
Thank you, John. Any follow-ups from others, Dawn, Troy, Heather, on that point?
No, it's a great answer. Mm-hmm.
Great. Dawn, over to you, perhaps. the whole notion of collaboration and managing change around the notion of growing potential is central to your talk. And it's really a preoccupation. The whole notion of collaboration and working across sectors, as John says, is a preoccupation of the sector. Can you give some examples of where this has occurred in effective ways between the stewards of climate and outdoor conservancy that you work in and the recreation sector? Do you have examples of that you can provide?
Well, the one example that comes to mind, which I think really speaks to the community on the call today, is the Parks for All initiative. I guess maybe to begin with that, I think to tackle these kinds of issues requires a great deal of humility, because every way of collaborating, it's going to be different for every single example, every single type of issue that you're going to tackle. So you need to just start with humility. And Parks for All, I think, was one of those initiatives where different organizations, individuals, levels, we all came together and started at the beginning to take ownership for what might a shared vision look like. Nobody came in with an agenda. So I think that Parks for All is an excellent example where we achieve success together using, a whole variety of perspectives and viewpoints right from the onset.
Very good. Thank you, Don. One last quick observation, and that is that Benjamin Branger noted that, Troy, your talk, all of the talks were excellent from the perspective of looking at managing this issue around a micro scale. In your case, Troy, neighborhoods. But a question and consideration is, how do we apply those approaches in a bigger scale at the city level, at the town level? And maybe I'll just ask Troy to speak quickly to that issue because we are, of course, over time, and we apologize for that. But Troy, over to you.
Very similar to what I said before. I think it's a scaling up issue. So I think as much as we support the bottom up, it leads to temporary changes that can lead to longer term change.
Very good.
That's how I'd respond.
Thank you. Thank you to all of you. I'm going to pass the baton back now to Mike to wrap us up, and perhaps Krista as well. So thank you again, and thank you all for having me today.
Thanks, Joe. On behalf of the board, thanks to everybody that made this happen. So staff, all of our presenters, and our partners, which again are Sport Canada and FTP Park related to this. I don't want to try to summarize any of the key themes, just because I don't think I could do it as much justice as all of the presenters did. We had a really great panel today and lots of really good content. But the one thing I will say is, from my perspective as chair of the board, and I know I'm speaking on behalf of the entire board when I say this, it's awesome to see a national discussion like this even happening. I think we got up to as much as 211, 212 participants, and we're still over 100 right now. And this is the kind of work that CPRA is excited to do in sharing information like this and complementing what our provincial and territorial associations are doing. So thanks again for participating in this, and thanks to everybody who helped to make it happen. Over to you, Krista.
Thanks, Mike. Yeah, and I want to extend my thanks to all of the speakers as well, who I thought did a great job. I would take one moment for a shameless plug on the Common Vision Toolkit that we're producing, that Troy and I are working on, that we're hoping it will be out in the spring with an online toolkit and some other opportunities to provide some of the content. It's really geared toward neighborhood residents. So with also a section that will be looking at how to support those. So it's called People Living in Neighborhoods. So it's for people living in neighborhoods, and then also for people supporting those who live in neighborhoods, and really giving them some great ideas as to how they can get more active in their neighborhoods, how they can help support their neighbors be more active and socially connected, and then how as a group, as a group of neighbors come together. So I think it's going to be we're really looking forward to it. We're still in the process of finalizing a few details, but we'll get it out to you as soon as we can. Wanted to let you know again, or just remind you about the bench, that we'd love to have more feedback, learn about what you're doing, start some conversations there. So please feel free to join up. We will send you a feedback survey. As I said at the beginning, would love your feedback, and also other topics of interest that you have that we can bring to you in the future. We did record this webinar. It will be on the bench in the coming days. And so we invite you to listen again if you want, or share with your colleagues. And then finally, we do have one last workshop in this series, and it's going to focus on technology. We had planned it for middle of February. We're actually pushing it out a tiny bit to, it's either going to be March 1st or 3rd. We will have that confirmed in the next day or two, again, on technology. So I think with that, that's it for me. Again, thank you. And to our wonderful speakers for their time and their expertise, and Joe for your facilitation, really appreciate it. And again, to my colleagues, MJ, Francois, and Joelle for their support today. So wishing you a great day, everyone. See you soon. Thanks.
Take care, everyone. Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.
Merci à tous, merci à tous les participants, merci à tous les conférenciers, merci à toute l'équipe. Comme le disait Christa, vous allez avoir un sondage à remplir. Nous aimerions avoir votre évaluation. Merci. L'enregistrement sera disponible sur le banc dans quelques jours, donc le banc acpl.ca. Le prochain webinaire, la date va probablement changer pour le début mars. Ce sera sur la technologie, nouvelles frontières dans les loisirs et le sport communautaire. Donc, merci à tous. Au revoir.
Merci. Thank you.
Good job, everybody.